Global Innovation Index, GS3 economy. India signed Science Change Treaty, GS3 environment. Overseas citizen of India, GS2 polity. 10 years of Make in India, GS3 economy. Swachh Bharat, GS2 and 3 environment also. So these are very important topics from mains perspective, and most of your tomorrow's current affairs questions also will be asked from these topics. Okay, so be cautious. So first topic of discussion, which is so much in news and geopolitical aspects, is Iran, Israel, Hezbollah conflict. So you know, West Asia as a region is always in news because of many reasons, right? West Asia is also called as Middle East, right? So these countries are considered to be West Asian countries. So here we have Iran, right? Here Pakistan, and here is India. And then we have Turkey or Turkey, that has renamed. In Syria we have, this is Lebanon, where Hezbollah is operating from. Hezbollah is a group, militant group from Lebanon. And here we have, this is Israel. This orange colored ones are Palestinian territories. And this is Egypt. Egypt, Sinai Peninsula is also part of West Asia. And then this is Saudi, Iraq, Jordan, like this we have some West Asian countries. So what is the main thing you need to know here is why this conflict actually has started. What is the source of conflict means. Before to understand what are the reasons and all, you just need to understand what is the term meaning direct conflict or direct war and proxy war, right? Till now, there is only a proxy war that is going on in West Asia. Proxy war means no country is directly involved in the war, okay? So they're helping some other groups or factions in the West Asia. For example, Iran, on one hand we have USA, Russia, all they're indirectly involved in the conflict. That means they're aiding by giving money, weapons and all to other countries in the conflict. Especially if you see, main tension in West Asia is because of religious and ideological differences. Religious differences because, you know, Israel is a Jewish country and Arab countries are Islamic countries. That is one main difference. And within Islamic countries also, there is a difference between Shia and Sunni. So that is also one difference. So this is how, if you see in Islamic countries, Iran is a Shiite country and Saudi is a Sunni dominated country. So Iran and Saudi both wanted to claim that global power position, especially in the Islamic countries. So I want to be dominant. I want to be the leader of all Muslims in the world. That is what both Saudi as well as Iran are trying, and they also represent different sections in the Islamic population. That is also one issue that is there. At the same time, mainly if you see in the recent times, last year also, since 2023, Israel-Palestine conflict is also so much in news. Why? Because Palestinian, if you see this area, this entire blue colored area now was part of Israel, but once it was part of Palestine. Okay, so Palestine used to be a British occupied territory. At that point of time, you know, like Holocaust happened in Germany and many Jews were persecuted by even Hitler and all. So then they started settling in this British territory of Palestine and they occupied it, and now they're saying that is entirely Israeli territory and there is no concept of Palestine. But Palestinian people are actually Arabs or Muslims. So Jewish or different religion. So these people, so they are having, we are actual natives and now we are getting displaced. That is the main confrontation, Israel-Palestine conflict. That is the main thing. So in Palestinian, we have two groups, Hamas, which is operating from Gaza, and we also have Palestinian Liberation Foundation. Like that we have some militant groups. So these groups are participating in the direct conflict with Israeli government. But all the groups, like for example, this Hamas or any other group, actually was getting funding and arms and everything from other countries like Iran. Okay, so Iran is also helping because Iran and Palestinian have that connect of Muslim brotherhood. Okay, Arab feeling, right? So that is why they are helping here, because same religion and it is Jewish, which is different religion from this particular countries. So that is the main source of confrontation. That is what you need to understand. Direct conflict means when two countries are participating directly in the war. Proxy war means they are helping some other countries or factions to participate in the war indirectly. So that is what actually happened. So till now, between Iran and Israel, there is only proxy war. But since 2 days, it has turned to be a direct war. Okay, so because Iran has bombed on Israeli settlements and all, Israel said we'll retaliate, right? So in that way, there is direct confrontation that actually has started. And there are many views also that this may actually trigger World War III also. Because West Asia as a region is always the hot cake. Okay, anywhere if you see, there will be some dispute. All the time it will be in news because of any reason. So that is why you need to know this term. Then what is axis of resistance? So this term is also very important because if you have seen today's news also, US President Joe Biden, so he said axis of resistance will definitely suffer. Okay, we'll make them to suffer. What is this axis of resistance? Iran, Yemen's Houthi rebels. Houthis are rebel group in Yemen. Yemen is also one country in West Asia. Then we have Hezbollah group operating from Lebanon. And we have Hamas, who are Hamas operating from Gaza Strip of Palestine. So these four groups, they form as axis of resistance. Okay, so they all have one common enemy, that is either USA, Western countries, and Israel. Israel is a close ally of USA. That is one you already know, right? So this is what you need to remember. Sometimes they can give this and they can ask you to match, or they can also give the matching or pairing based questions and ask you to identify what is correct. Okay, then you also need to know recently because of attack on even on Lebanon or on the Israel settlements by Iran also, this Iron Dome shield of Israel is also in use. Iron Dome means they have very strong defense system. In case if you attack on Israeli settlements also, this will prevent that particular missile from entering. Okay, so like how you have the traction kavach or shield, generally when the war generally happens, king used to wear some protective shield, right? Same way Israeli also have their own dome. Dome means the shape. So it is an anti-missile system. It will revert back the missiles which are aimed at Israel. And this is only for medium range missiles. Okay, so that can only stop medium range missiles. But if there is any long ballistic range missile, then they also have advanced missile system called Arrow. Okay, sometimes they can also ask you, Iron Dome is seen in news recently. In that way also they can ask you. You need to be aware of this term, need not go into the implications of it. Then we also know Sunni and Shia. In Islamic population, there is a segment, Sunni and Shia. In India, who are dominating? Sunnis. Same way is the case of Saudi Arabia. Shiites are minorities. Okay, so the difference is between after Prophet Muhammad, who have to lead Islam. So whether it is the brother or son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, in that way they have that ideological differences and they have formed two sects. Okay, so that is one you need to understand. Then we cannot say like that, okay, but they have some similarities, at the same time differences are also there. In that particular country, for example in India, Sunni is the majority, Shia is the minority. Same way in the case of Iran, Shia is the majority and Sunni is the minority population. Okay, so in that way we got divided across the countries. Then coming to the reasons of the conflict between Iran, Israel, or Israel and Lebanon also. Lebanon, we'll keep it aside, but Iran and Israel, if you see, once they were very good friends. Okay, so once means after even the formation of Israel in 1948, they were very good friends. Okay, so and interestingly, Iran became the very second country to support formation of Israel. So it had established diplomatic ties and everything was smooth at that point of time. And till 1948 till 1979, when Islamic Revolution happened in Iran, so till that time, Iran was a very good friend of US and Israel also. So things have changed over the time, because at that point of time, the ruler of Iran, Shah regime, that has turned in favor of US and all. So there is some feeling that people got that US is exploiting in the name of friendship and all. So resources are getting exploited. Only king is getting benefit. The people are not seeing any welfare or benefit measures and all. In that way, that revolution actually has sparked in Iran and it has resulted in Islamic revolution. Interestingly, before that, Iran was a modern state, before 1979 revolution. Now, after that revolution and resistance from the people, it turned to be a theocratic state. Theocratic state means which follows one official religion. They made Islam. That means once before the revolution, they were secular, and then they turned that we are completely Islamic state. In that way, the transition happened. So, when Islam is the official religion, US officially distances because, okay, at that point of time when they were modern, they were good friends with USA. But now things have changed. So Israel also have distanced from Iran. In that way, after 1979, they became bitter rivals. And they also have grown suspicion that Iran is always trying to threaten USA and other countries, allies of USA and all, because they're strengthening their nuclear establishments and all, or many things are there. In the meantime, many things have changed and all. Suddenly, there are some sanctions also imposed. That is what USA will do, because it is global hegemony. That is what USA is having now. So, generally if any country, for example, when Iran and India are trading, for example, Iran was imposed with a lot of economic sanctions. Sanctions means you cannot do this and all, like that USA is dictating us. So at that point of time, India wants to implement the Chabahar port and we wanted to take oil from Iran. So US is pressurizing, in case if you trade with Iran, I'm going to impose sanctions on you. Who have that right actually on India? Is it the USA? They are also a fellow country like us. How can they dictate what should be done and all, right? So even in the case of Russia also, the same thing was done. So they are not saying you cannot buy S-400 trim missile system. When we wanted to trade with any other country, US will make a remark. So in that way, it has also imposed the same restrictions on economy of Iran. So economy of Iran became so closed because no country is coming against USA to trade with Iran. And they have very good oil reserves, but no one is buying their oil. So the economy is falling down. At that point of time, in 2015, US president at that point of time is Barack Obama. So he made, because compared to Trump and all these persons, he was very good and radical in his approach and all. So he has taken a stand of signing an Iran nuclear deal. Nuclear deal means at that time, Iran was of, like US and other countries were of suspicion that Iran is using the nuclear reserves it had for enriching nuclear establishment, means they're trying to make some nuclear weapons out of it. That is a suspicion that US have developed. And these people want that to end, because if Iran is making a missile or any weapon, that will target USA definitely, right? That is the reason he came forward along with all P5 countries, along with Germany. They have signed a historic nuclear deal with Iran, saying that Iran has to adhere to, there is one organization called International Atomic Energy Agency. This is a UN atomic watchdog. Okay, so UN agency which will normally see the nuclear related things and all of the UN countries. So this has to go and check every time. Okay, anytime if it feels that Iran is enriching the uranium, it can go and make surprise visits and inspections. In that way, Iran has agreed. In return, US has agreed to lift off some sanctions on Iran so that they also can have market access. So that is the main thing that happened. But if everything is going on smooth, why this conflict will happen, right? So, after Donald Trump came to power, after Barack Obama, and he said, no, we are withdrawing from nuclear deal. It is Obama who tried to resort the tension. But this person says, I wanted to withdraw. Okay? So, because his mind will not be stable. He wants some conflict to happen in the countries, right? So, he said that decision. And Iran said, if you are withdrawing, I'll also not reciprocate it. Okay? I'll again enrich my nuclear things, and why I need to adhere to the International Atomic Energy Agency standards and all these things. So they also started. In that way again, suspicion, tension, all this have crept into the geopolitics, and from then Iran again was targeted by Western countries. And Iran is also fueling those who are fighting against the West. For example, Hamas, Hezbollah, all these are again Islamic groupings only, but rebel groupings. Rebel means who are revolting against the government itself. Okay, these governments are helped by USA or Western countries. Some anti will be there now. Okay, against the government, they are forming as local groups, and all these groups are Islamic origin, and they were sponsored by Iran. So you understand, the picture is not actually internal conflict. It became global because of the proxy war. Okay, so that is how the things are changing. So historical reasons are the difference between Iran and Israel after 1979 revolution. Then religious and ideological differences I told you just now. Okay, Israel is Jewish state, and this country Iran is a Shiite Muslim population. Then Israeli-Palestine conflict has started last year, 2023, and you know Palestine is also considered to be Islamic country. So Iran definitely will support Palestine, and Palestinians' enemy will become enemy of Iran also. That is how they also have entered into the conflict. In geopolitical rivalry, just now I told you US and Iran had the differences, so that is also actually increase in this conflict. Then nuclear program, proxy conflicts I just told you now. Okay, so that means indirectly they're helping some other militant groups to destabilize the government. US is stabilizing those governments or helping those governments, and they are helping anti-government or rebel groups. And then we have regional power dynamics. For example, in the West Asia also, Saudi wants to take the lead among the Muslim countries, and on the other hand, Iran wants to. And Saudi and Iran were always at the far ends because, you know, against Sunni versus Shia. In that way, many reasons have actually triggered the recent conflict. Okay, these are all the past reasons. Then, if you come to the recent, as I just told you, withdrawal from the Iran's nuclear deal that happened 2015, it was signed. 2018, they have withdrawn. Right. Then there is also assassination of Iran's army general by US and allied countries. They have killed the Iran's army general, okay, Soleimani, in the year 2020, and they very well know that it is USA who have done. So then there is also Hamas missile attack on whom? Hamas is a group in Palestine, okay, Palestine, especially Gaza Strip. So they have attacked Israel in the year 2023. Then Red Sea crisis also, Houthis of Yemen, they started targeting ships of Western countries and their allies, so which are all passing through Red Sea. They control some significant region of Red Sea, and they started attacking on the Red Sea ships and all. So that is how it has happened. And there is also recent attack on Iranian embassy in Iran, was of suspicion that it is Israel who have done all this. So these are all the recent initiatives or recent events, we can say, which has further intensified the conflict between Iran and Israel. Then what are the implications? Say if anything is happening at a far distance, why should India worry about it? Because we are also globalized. Now entire world became a global village. So there will be, if two countries are fighting somewhere also, there will be some or another impact on India, directly or indirectly. So what is the first thing? Economic implications. Economic means, you know, majority of oil that we import is from Persian Gulf. And you know, Iran is also near to the Persian Gulf. That means if any geopolitical tension happens in that region, again, that may disrupt our oil. Okay, or oil shocks also may happen. Oil shocks means if the prices of oil increase, then what happens? Inflation comes into economy, right? Inflation means rise in prices. If oil price increase, every other product price also increase. Inflation will definitely impact all of us, right? So in that way, Iran and Israel's conflict is also impacting you and me also, right? So we are paying more rupees for same liter of oil, and in that way, everything also becomes costly. Then it also, see, because Europe is also very important for India's trade. Okay, why I'm mentioning here Europe is, we know like to access Europe, okay, either we need to go through Africa, sorry, you need to go through this Red Sea region, or either through Afghanistan to Central Asian countries, there from Europe, there, that is also the possible way. But you know, access to Afghanistan was now cut because POK is under the control of Pakistan. So on the other way, what we found? We developed Chabahar port, right? So if this is India and this is Pakistan, here we have Iran and this is Afghanistan. So this, because of POK, we didn't have access to this. Okay. So now what we are doing? We are constructing and developing Chabahar port here, okay, in Iran. From Iran, they'll go into Afghanistan, and from there we can have access to Central Asian and European region. That means if there is any conflict in Iran, this entire trade disruption also will happen. European markets will not be that easily accessible for India. That is also economic impact. And then diaspora. You know, significant population of Indian community are living in West Asian countries. They are doing blue collar jobs, especially in oil refineries, construction, etc. And they will send us remittances also. Remittances means they'll earn some money there and they'll again share some money back to the country for their family members and all. So that will also decline. Remittances are good part of our current account. Okay, so that will also impact. Then connectivity, like Chabahar port we have in Iran, this also gets impacted. This is India's port in Iran. Then we recently have signed India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. Okay, so India with Middle East, their Europe corridor. Okay, so this was signed on the lines of G20 summit that happened in India. Okay, so this may also get threatened. And then we also have International North-South Transport Corridor. This is between initially Russia, India, and Iran. So these three countries have actually signed initially, but later on many other countries also joined. Connectivity project, especially to increase trade between these countries of Asia and Europe. And we also have Ashgabat Agreement. Like that, we have many connectivity projects on the map. Okay, so all these may get written in case if there is any tension that is there in the West Asian region. Then diplomatic challenges for India, because India is also having good relations with Iran as well as Israel. We started late relations with Israel, 1992, but from the beginning, Iran is also, comparative to the Pakistan, they have tilted towards India. Okay, a bit, you can understand, because India is a large market for their oil and all. So for these reasons, India and Iran also have good relations. India and Israel also have good relations. Then whom will India support? We cannot say India will support only Iran or Israel. Okay, that will be a definitely test for India, right? So we need to make a balance between both. Okay, we cannot cut one against another. That is also one challenge we had in the future. That means, for example, even if you see the case of Russia-Ukraine conflict, in any resolution that was initiated in UN, what happened? India abstained voting. That's only just abstain. Means they don't want to participate, because if you vote in favor of Russia, US will feel happy. Okay, US will not feel happy. But if you vote against Russia, they'll feel happy. That means either you have to compromise with USA or Russia, but you cannot maintain. And from the beginning, we know we are following non-aligned policy. We don't want to take either stand, right? That is why India is also in the diplomatic trouble. Okay, so that is one. Then till now, is there any effort taken by international countries, especially to resolve these conflicts? Means we have Oslo Accords of 1993. Oslo Accords were signed between US. Actually, this country, USA, has sponsored this, or you can say brokered this Oslo Accords to normalize the tensions that happened between Israel and Palestine. At that point of time, many accords were signed. One of the accord is Israel-Palestine. To mediate the conflict, US have made this effort. But they have signed and none of them were implemented. Okay, there's no use of it. Then Abraham Accord. So this was signed in the presence of USA. So they have only mediated. Here you have Israel, UAE, and Bahrain. So these three countries. Okay. So why? Because Israel is a Jewish country. These two are Islamic countries. When Israel-Palestine conflict started, from the beginning, all Arab nations, all the Muslim countries in the West Asia, they supported Palestine against Israel. So they don't have good relations with each other. But US wants Israel to have good relations with all countries, to isolate Iran, which is the enemy of USA. So that is why they wanted these countries also to have good relations with Israel, and they brokered an initiative called Abraham Accord. This was signed in the year 2020. Okay, so that means slowly Arab countries who did not have any relation with Israel started establishing some relations with Israel. Then we also have I2U2, two I's, I for India and I for Israel, and then USA and UAE. Okay, so this is a Quad 2.0 or West Asian Quad. Quad means quadrilateral grouping. 4 countries grouping, we call it as a quad. And we know generally quad is also different grouping between USA, Australia, Japan, India. So this is with respect to Indo-Pacific region, right? But here it is West Asian Quad or Quad 2.0, second quad, right? So this is one effort. This was initiated in 2021. Then Arab Peace Initiative is also there. Arab League, we have a group of Arab countries. So they also have initiated a peace initiative to normalize the tensions between all the Arab countries with Israel. Okay, all these are there, but there is no effort and there is no outcome from these efforts. Then, what is India's role? So, what India should do now? We always advocate dialogue and diplomacy. We don't advocate any time conflict. Dialogue and diplomacy only have to go together, right? So India has to take the diplomatic relations also normalized with Israel and Iran. We cannot again balance. We have to balance. And then India always advocates this with respect to Israel-Palestine conflict. Two-state solution, right? Two-state means we are recognizing Israel, we are also recognizing Palestine. Okay, we are not in favor of one country. Then we also have supported in terms of Gaza height. Even Gaza Strip, entire humanitarian crisis have come. So at that time also we have given humanitarian aid, food, medicine, all the relief we have provided. In that way, India is trying to occupy the global, okay? So you can say global power position, which is very much important for us now to even secure seat in UNSC, United Nations Security Council. So all this will enhance our image. Then what is the way forward you can suggest? Always, okay, so there should be peace and stability, dialogue, okay, so no country, we cannot favor any one side or anything, we always have to maintain good relations and there should be some peace and stability. In that way, we have to rate. But what is most important is, all these reasons may not be asked, but in prelims what they can ask you, based on mapping, they'll definitely ask you questions. From 2014-15, if you see, every year there is going to be one question, they're asking from Mediterranean region. Every year one question, on mapping only they're asking. That is what the importance of West Asia and UPSC. Then in mains they'll ask you this conflict between Israel-Lebanon or Israel-Iran. So how this is going to impact India? Should India worry? Like that they'll ask you mains questions. That means you need to know the reasons, what is India's stand, and how India is going to get impacted, right? That is the thing you need to know. Then answer this question. Mediterranean Sea is a border of which of the following countries? Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. For which countries we have Mediterranean coast? Syria? Yes or no? Lebanon? You know Lebanon has to be there, right? So check with, you can rule out these two options. Your job, 3 and 4, right? Lebanon is 3. Okay, so you can, all 3 is there presently. Okay, so then how? You need to know which country has to be the target. Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. Lebanon and Syria only. Jordan we don't have, right? Israel will come into picture. Between Israel and Mediterranean Sea, if you see here, I'll show you the map also. So Jordan is here. Israel will come in the way, okay, with respect to Mediterranean Sea. And we have Syria. Syria is also opening, okay. So that means you have to rule out only Jordan. Iraq also will not open. Iraq we know anyhow, that will not come. So Iraq and Jordan eliminate cheste, you will get the answer. So eliminate Jordan and Iraq, Lebanon and Syria. 3 and 4 will be the answer. Okay. Then next topic is 6th schedule status as demanded by Ladakh. Okay. So first you need to know Ladakh was once part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now it became a union territory. Only 2 districts used to be part of Ladakh, Leh and Kargil, but now 4 more districts got reorganized because administrative convenience and all. But you need to know, now after becoming a separate union territory, they felt we want 6th schedule status. What is 6th schedule status means? Simple, it is giving more autonomy in terms of governance. That means, so local issues or culture, traditions, everything will be taken into consideration in terms of administration and governance. So why they're asking? Because Ladakh is also ecologically important area in Himalayas we have. It is also environmentally sensitive area, and also very much important is when they were part of one state, okay, most of the development or all the money used to go to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the present UT of Jammu and Kashmir. So they were devoid of development. Okay, now, and most of the jobs also were occupied by Kashmiris or the people from Jammu and Kashmir. So they want representation because significant population of Ladakh is tribal. So they want their cultural identity. In case if you're not keeping on the 6th schedule, if you generally govern, Then outsiders like us people, we can settle there and we can buy land, we'll do all the things which should not be done, right? So that is the reason why Ladakh is asking for autonomy. In case if it is given 6th schedule status, only the locals will participate in the administration and governance. That is the reason why they're asking. And you know one famous climate activist, Sonam Wangchuk, okay? So he wants to march to Delhi and all to show their demand and all, and he was dating. And you know the Three Idiots, like Three Idiots movie. Have you heard about it? Watched about? Yes or no? Okay, so he was very famous. The Sonam Wangchuk was famous for building that ice stupa also. Okay, very good engineer also. And then why demand, I told you, for greater autonomy and to protect their culture. Two reasons. Okay, it is not only Ladakh which is asking for 6th schedule, and two other states like Arunachal Pradesh and Manipur, they were also asking for 6th schedule status. Okay, so this demand is not new only to Ladakh. Then India, in the context of federal issues, we need to remember India is a quasi-federal state. Federation means where there will be one source, like constitution, that will define the powers and boundaries of two organs of the government, like center and state, that will be defined by the constitution itself. So unitary, you know, on the other hand, will be where central will be more powerful than the state, center as a whole, right? So, but in federation, they'll have equal powers, they have to work within their domain. That is what federation. But Indian federation is quasi-federal because, you know, without amendment, sometimes they turn to be unitary in times of emergencies and all. At the same time, in terms of federation also, we are asymmetric federalism. Asymmetric means there won't be similar treatment for all the states. Okay, so some states were given special benefits by the government of India because of their backwardness or whatever the things they are facing with. So in that way, we have asymmetric federalism. Some, for example, you have some special status. Earlier, Jammu and Kashmir also have under Article 370, right? So northeastern states from 371A to 371G, we have many states covered with special provisions. So like that, we have asymmetric federalism, means we are not treating all the states equally. So some states are geographically good, they are also economically good and all. But some states like northeastern India, you know, totally they're cut off from the mainstream society. They were devoid of development and all these things. So we need to provide special care and attention to these areas. That is why we call it India as a asymmetric federalism. On the other hand, we have symmetric federalism also in countries like USA, Australia, some other countries, Canada also, where they treat all the states equally. There won't be any differentiation. Okay, but what is the most important thing you need to know is what is the source from where we have inspired and have taken the concept of 5th and 6th schedule. Means it was sourced from Government of India Act 1935. During British rule, we have this Government of India Act 1935, right? So at that point of time, because the British want to exploit northeastern India because of the forest reserves they have and all, so they have brought the concept of excluded and partial excluded areas under 1935 Act. Excluded areas means hilly areas. So they are totally excluded from the access by outsiders. Outsiders like us cannot go and access there or cannot settle there. That is what the concept of excluded areas. And partially excluded areas means the areas with not actually hilly areas but with significant tribal population. And you know, at the time Bihar, Jharkhand were together, right? So Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, where the belt of tribals are actually high, so they were designated as partially excluded areas. They're not actually doing a favor for the tribals. In the name of favor to the tribals, they're doing what they want and they wanted to exploit as much as they can, right? So that is what the source of inspiration for 5th and 6th schedule areas. Taking the idea from this only, we have incorporated the concept of 5th and 6th schedule in the Indian Constitution. Then, so what is 5th schedule area? 5th schedule means scheduled area, right? So scheduled area means any economically backward area or which is rich in tribal population and which is also facing some restraints from development and all. So those type of areas will be identified as scheduled area. That means in one area, if compared to the other sections of the population, if tribal population is more than 90% or so, then we need to make it as a scheduled area so that a special focus also and special administrative mechanism will be implemented in that particular scheduled area. That is why we make 5th schedule. Okay, so then we need to understand currently 10 states in India where we have significant tribal population or under scheduled areas of 5th schedule. Okay, then what will be the governance mechanism? We have tribal advisory councils, TACs we call, that will be constituted under these scheduled areas. So generally tribal advisory council means again the local people who are the tribes will form part of the administrative mechanism. They will advise to the government what is good and what is bad, and in that way we are taking care about their culture at the same time governance. So no, like for example, nothing from Hyderabad or from the Telangana will be deciding something happening in the Adilabad or anything. So Adilabad is also a scheduled area, right? So because there also we have significant tribal population. In Telangana, Bhadradri, Kottagudem also we have scheduled area because there are also tribals out there. That means they have separate mechanism. So someone sitting in Hyderabad cannot dictate what has to happen in that particular area. So it is the locals of that area who will decide. In that way, we made a mechanism called Tribal Advisory Councils of 5th schedule areas. Administrative local level వాళ్ళకి ఎలా కావాలంటే అలానే ఉంటుంది. Okay, so according to that particular tribes and their customs and local traditions and all, it will vary. But administrative mechanism ట్రైబల్ ఎక్కడైతే రిచ్ ఉంటాయి మనకి సిగ్నిఫికెంట్ ట్రైబల్ పాపులేషన్ ఉందో అక్కడ గవర్నర్ ఖచ్చితంగా మినిస్ట్రీ ఆఫ్ ట్రైబల్ అఫైర్స్ ని క్రియేట్ చేయాలి అండ్ దట్ విల్ బి గివెన్ సెపరేట్లీ బై దట్ గవర్నర్. ఓకే, ఫండింగ్ అదంతా చూసుకోవాల్సిన అవసరం ఉంటుంది ఎందుకంటే జనరలీ ఇఫ్ యూ డోంట్ మేక్ దట్ మ్యాండేటరీ దీస్ పీపుల్ విల్ నాట్ గెట్ ఎనీ ఫండింగ్, రైట్? సో సచ్ రెస్ట్రిక్షన్స్ విల్ బి దేర్. ఓకే, దెన్ land rights is also important. So you know, once if any tribe is having any land on his own, most of us like outsiders will force him somewhere or will like blackmail or do anything and will try to grab that land, right? So forest land is very much important. That is the reason land rights were also very restricted in the scheduled areas. That means no land can be transferred from tribals to non-tribals. Under any situation or circumstance also, tribe cannot sell or cannot exchange any land to the non-tribal. It can happen only between tribe and tribe. Okay, so that is why it is also restricting the land rights. And who can make modifications? It is the governor of that state. Only can make modifications with respect to land rights. Then modification of laws. Generally, if you know, any law passed by Indian Parliament will apply to all over India. Okay, again need not accepted by the state and all. Sometimes without the state saying anything also, it will directly apply. Sometimes states, if they wanted to make their own laws prevail in that particular territory, they have to reserve it for the president's consent, right? That is a mechanism. But in the scheduled areas, any law passed by state assembly or parliament will not directly apply. Governor has to again apply that particular law to that particular area. In case if he feels there won't be any threat to the culture and their identity, nothing will happen if this law is implemented in this territory. If he feels so, then only he can extend that law to the scheduled area. Otherwise, that will not be applied. In that way, there is also some provision. In all these ways, we are trying to ensure they're having that independence and autonomy in their administration. Then, yes. See, in 6th schedule also, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram we have. Only with respect to Assam, governor will have. Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram, president will have. Okay, so in terms of scheduled areas, all the scheduled areas, more power will be with the governor because governor is in charge of the state administration and all, right? He's a constitutional head in that state, so every power will be there with the governor itself. Only in the 6th scheduled areas, especially in Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram only, president will have the power. Assam, this is a governor again. Union territories are directly administered by the center itself, right? యూనియన్ టెరిటరీస్ లో కూడా షెడ్యూల్డ్ ఏరియాస్ ఉండొచ్చు. షెడ్యూల్డ్ ఏరియాస్ ఉంటే ఆల్రెడీ అది కంట్రోల్ సెంట్రల్ గవర్నమెంట్ కిందే ఉంది కాబట్టి అది ప్రాబ్లమే కాదు. గవర్నర్ ఉండడు కదా యూనియన్ టెరిటరీస్ లో. మనకి లెఫ్టినెంట్ గవర్నర్ ఎక్కడ ఉంటారు? ఓన్లీ ఢిల్లీ అండ్ పుడుచేరి. మిగతా వాళ్ళకి అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్సే ఉంటారు. ఇప్పుడు లడాక్ విషయంలో కూడా మనకి అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ అంటాం, అక్కడ లెఫ్టినెంట్ గవర్నర్ అట్లాంటివి. మనం జనరల్ గా అసెంబ్లీ ఉన్న చోట లెఫ్టినెంట్ గవర్నర్ అని టర్మ్ వస్తుంది మీకు. సో అక్కడ ఏంటంటే వాళ్ళకి మెకానిజం చాలా క్లియర్గా ఉంటుంది. అడ్మినిస్ట్రేటర్ అంటే ఒక ఆఫీసర్ మెయిన్లీ, అంతకు మించి పెద్దగా ఏమి ఉండదు. మొత్తం కూడా సెంటర్ చేసిన లాసే అప్లై అవుతాయి కాబట్టి అక్కడ కాన్ఫ్లిక్ట్ కానీ అవేం రావు. ఓకే, దెన్ 10 states in India currently have fifth schedule area status. Okay, then sixth schedule area gives more autonomy to tribals, especially than fifth schedule areas. Then this applies to only 4 states in India: Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. So that is the reason why Ladakh also wants this status to be given, because compared to fifth schedule, sixth schedule areas have more autonomy in terms of administration. So they will have a mechanism called autonomous district councils, ADCs, like how we have tribal advisory councils in fifth schedule. Here the naming is autonomous district councils. So this district councils also will have almost 2/3 representation will be from the locals only, and 1/3 will be nominated by the governor. Okay, so in that way, locals only will be part of administrative mechanism. And these ADCs or autonomous district councils, they can make their own laws with respect to marriage, customs, inheritance, etc. And they can also set up their local courts. They also have financial powers. They can also tax, they can collect revenue, everything. That means you can understand a small type of mini government at the district level is operating in the sixth schedule areas. So in that way, they have legislative powers, executive powers, judicial powers, financial powers also. They can prepare their own budget also. In that way, they have complete independence in their territory. Then Uniform Civil Code. That is what you see. Even in the case of Citizenship Amendment Act also, we didn't apply that to sixth schedule areas, if you have seen, right? Why? Because their culture and their identity has to be protected. అందుకనే ఇండియా ఏ పార్లమెంట్ లా పాస్ చేసినా కూడా మనకి డైరెక్ట్ గా సిక్స్త్ అండ్ ఫిఫ్త్ షెడ్యూల్స్ కి అప్లై అవ్వదు. ద కన్స్ట్రైంట్స్ విల్ బి దేర్ అండ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ ద గవర్నర్ హూ విల్ డిసైడ్. అంటే సిక్స్త్ షెడ్యూల్ అయితే అస్సాం తప్పించి మేఘాలయ, త్రిపుర, మిజోరాం కి ప్రెసిడెంట్ డిసైడ్ చేయాలి వెదర్ దట్ విల్ యాక్చువల్లీ అప్లై దేర్ ఆర్ నాట్. ఫర్ గవర్నర్ అస్సాం కి అయితే గవర్నర్. సో ఇన్ దట్ వే అందుకని వాళ్ళకి అక్కడ లోకల్ రిప్రజెంటేషన్ బట్టి ఇప్పుడు కమ్యూనిటీస్ ని బట్టి డివైడ్ అవుతుంది. సో ఇప్పుడు మీరు అందుకే చూస్తే అస్సాంలో మనకి బోడో టెరిటోరియల్ కౌన్సిల్ అట్లా డివైడ్ అవుతాయి అనమాట, డివిజన్స్ లాగా. డిస్ట్రిక్ట్స్ అనేవి ఏమున్నాయి అస్సాంలో, దాన్ని బట్టి ఒక్కొక్క దానికి ఒక కౌన్సిల్ ఉంటుంది. ఇప్పుడు అటానమస్ డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ కౌన్సిల్ ఉన్నట్టే మళ్ళీ దీని కింద అటానమస్ ట్రైబల్ కౌన్సిల్స్ ఉంటాయి అనమాట. అట్లా లోకల్ లెవెల్ వరకు వెళ్తారు. అప్పుడేంటి, ఒక పర్టికులర్ రీజన్ లో ఏ ట్రైబ్ డామినేట్ చేస్తున్నారో వాళ్ళు ఉంటారు ఎక్కువ ప్రెసెంటేషన్. ఇల్లీగల్ మైగ్రెంట్స్ కి అసలు మనం సిటిజన్షిప్ లేకపోతే వాళ్ళకి రిప్రజెంటేషన్ ఎలా ఉంటుంది? ఇండియన్స్ అయితే ఇస్తాం. ఇండియన్స్ కి ఎలా ఇస్తున్నాము? వెస్ట్ బెంగాల్ నుంచి అయినా బంగ్లాదేశ్ నుంచి అయినా 24 మార్చ్ 1971 కంటే ముందు వచ్చిన వాళ్ళని ఇండియా సిటిజన్స్ కి రికగ్నైజ్ చేస్తుంది. ఆ డేట్ తర్వాత వచ్చిన వాళ్ళని వీఆర్ నాట్ రికగ్నైజింగ్ యాస్ ఇండియన్ సిటిజన్. వాళ్ళకి అసలు మామూలు వెల్ఫేర్ మెషర్సే ఉండవు, ఇంకా అలాంటప్పుడు రిప్రజెంటేషన్ ఉండదు కదా, రైట్? Then they also have judicial powers and powers of revenue and taxation. Then you need to know, compared to fifth schedule, sixth schedule areas have more autonomy and independence. That is why Ladakhs are asking for sixth schedule instead of fifth. Okay. Then this is the special provision. Asymmetric federalism anukunnam kada, right? What is asymmetric federalism? These states have special provisions. Like for example 371. This is with respect to Maharashtra and Karnataka. Okay. And 371A is with respect to Nagaland. B with respect to Assam. You can see here. C Manipur. D is with respect to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. E is with respect to Andhra Pradesh Tribal University and Central University. F is with respect to Sikkim. G with Mizoram. H Arunachal Pradesh. I Goa. And J is with respect to Karnataka. Like that, we have some special provisions. These are highlighting that India's federalism is asymmetric. Okay, not symmetric federalism. Just remember the articles. Then why they're demanding for Ladakh is why they're asking for special schedule is of the reorganization in 2019. As I told you previously also, they already got discriminated in terms of funding and developmental projects compared to the Jammu and Kashmir persons. But now after reorganization also, they became a union territory. But they wanted to open everything like economy and all. That is the reason they even have removed inner line permit. Inner line permit means it's like a permission. Once if a person who have to enter into a protected area, he need to take permission to enter. Okay, so outsiders cannot enter into that area. If this is there in Ladakh, what happens? Tourism cannot grow, right? So you people and we cannot go there and we cannot visit. So that will restrict again the economic opportunities of Ladakhis. So that is the reason immediately after reorganization, they have removed inner line permit in Ladakh to make more accessible. But they wanted to increase their economic opportunities. At the same time, they also want more employment opportunities for their people. At the same time, they also wanted to protect their culture, ecology also, environment. Because it is a cold desert, and very sensitive area also in terms of ecology. So why 6th schedule? Because of more autonomy, and they also wanted this, they also have removed this. In central government, why it is not in favor of 6th schedule is, they said it will also create some legal hurdles because only 4 states were given that 6th schedule status by constitution. That is what central government is saying. And they also said, like, in case if we create, okay, again, it may increase the demands by other states also, like Arunachal, Manipur. They're already asking, that may also increase further demands. And they also say, we have given more reservation. So the main person, like if you see in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, then they used to have only 10% reservations, the locals of that particular area. But now they said, we are giving more than 45% reservation to locals only. Then what is the problem? Why you need only autonomy? That is the main thing they're asking, okay? But there are some arguments in favor and against also. These type of questions can be asked in mains, okay? So in favor, what is the main thing you can say? It will give more autonomy, means cultural identity will be given, and administration also will become easy for the local areas. Then you also understand it is ecologically sensitive area. It is better if you give the administration to the locals because they have that feeling of we in that area. But if you or me are posted there, will we have that particular identity or attachment towards that particular ecology? No, right? That is also one reason. And it will also enhance local representation in the administration, right? So these are the arguments in favor for 6th schedule for Ladakh. But what are the arguments against? It will create legal and administrative challenges. Then it will also increase further other demands. At the same time, they said reservations are already hiked. Then what is the demand for 6th schedule? That is what the central government stand. And if you are reserving it only for the locals, for example, if there are certain jobs reserved for the locals, and if there is no person who is qualified in the locals, then can we stop that particular thing at that situation only? We have to take from outside also, no? That may hinder their economic employment and other opportunities also, right? So this is the argument against. Neglected by the center. So you are saying neglected by the center.
Obviously, it is historically evident that even British.
Is it your question or anyone else's question? Okay. So you cannot say that center has neglected because any aspirant, okay, who wanted to be part of government cannot make a criticism against the government that they have neglected. First thing. And second is, see, Northeast as an area is geographically isolated, right? So it is cut from the mainstream society except that Siliguri corridor or Chicken Neck corridor. That's the main thing. And they are having different set of cultural identity compared to the mainstream society. So, and that is the reason why development has become very low in Northeast. But you have to highlight how government is trying to integrate India, integrate into mainstream India. Like even Act East policy, look East, West into Act East, keeping Northeast into mind. We are enhancing our trade relations with ASEAN countries. We are also initiating some developmental projects like Kaladan multimodal project with Myanmar, right? So India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Like that, we have many multimodal projects also. All these are again oriented towards Northeastern India. And we are also increasing this border presence also. Vibrant border village program also. Vibrant village program we have, right? And Atal Setu, that was also inaugurated recently. In that way, we are increasing the infrastructure funding, and we also have created a separate department of Northeastern region, right? And we made a separate ministry also. And zonal councils were also created for Northeastern states. In that way, we are trying to integrate them into the mainstream society. But see, what are the main things that have isolated them? Geographic, social, cultural. So, there is also insurgency. And insurgency actually is dominating the development or administration. So, these are the factors which have cut India in Northeastern things. But what are the efforts that we have taken to make them into mainstream India? That is also what you have to write. Okay, you cannot end any note on that saying like Prime Minister or any central government has it not treated this Northeast in a proper way and all. That should not be the answer because we cannot make any criticism. Whatever the criticism that you make against the government has to be constructive. Okay, So you cannot end anything in the negative note, right? Then
Ma'am, the fixed schedule travel areas, should the bureaucrats be locals or foreign?
సో బ్యూరోక్రాట్స్ ఉన్నారు అక్కడ, అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ కూడా వాళ్ళకి లోకల్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ ఉంటుంది, మనలాగా డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ ఇలా ఉండదు అనమాట. సో అంటే డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ ఇన్ఛార్జ్ కలెక్టర్ ఉన్నా కూడా బిలో డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ కలెక్టర్ హూఎవర్ విల్ బి దేర్, దే విల్ బి డెఫినెట్లీ ఫ్రమ్ ద లోకల్స్. Okay, so that local culture, local identity lekapothe, again outside influence will be there, right? That is the reason that will not be. The next topic is draft guidelines on euthanasia. Okay, passive euthanasia to be precise. So what is euthanasia? Euthanasia means it's like a self-suicide. Okay, you can say. So euthanasia means a process of killing a person. So that can be two ways, passive or active. Passive means you are not doing intentionally or not directly. For example, in passive euthanasia, a person who is terminally ill, that means not a person who is beyond recovery or who is not responding to the treatment. For many years he was there on the bed. Then that person is also suffering. Although he is not responding to the outside world, but he is still suffering because of that medical treatment and all. So in that situation, if you withdraw the life support, ventilators or the food you provide to that person through food pipe and all, if that is actually removed, that is what we call it as passive euthanasia. We are removing artificial support and we are asking and we are allowing that person to die naturally. That is what passive euthanasia. That is legal in India from 2018. Okay, so and active euthanasia is when the doctors intentionally inject, okay, some injections or lethal substances so that that person will die. That is active euthanasia. That means directly with an injection or something, you are killing that person without his natural thing, right? That is why active euthanasia is not legal in India. It is illegal. Only passive is allowed. Okay, keep this in mind. Because active euthanasia will make again right to die. That person has the right to die. But it is not that person who is deciding, right? So that is the reason why in India, active is not allowed. Only in some countries, active euthanasia is officially or legally recognized. Then after understanding in the recent times, this concept is also very much in use because of different reasons. One reason is Supreme Court has started allowing living will concept for euthanasia. Okay, so living will means if a healthy person, okay, and who is having sound mind and all, in future he can say, in case if I have any injury and if I am beyond the recovery, then I may have euthanasia. That means you are giving your consent for the things which are not in your hand at that point of time. So living will, again that has to be when you are in sound mind condition, physically everything okay, then that also have to be attested by a legal practitioner, and also two major persons also have to be witness. Certain conditions are there. In that way, legal will concept also was brought into euthanasia. Because the person who is actually on bed, okay, so he cannot come and say that whether I wanted to die or I wanted to live, right? That is the reason why we have brought this living will concept. Till now what happens is the patients, again nearby persons will be their family members and all, they are deciding the things. Okay, so sometimes what happens is that may also actually lead to different situation where the family members, for example, if any girl or boy, if from the beginning if they are suffering from any problem, okay, beyond recovery or mental issues and all, sometimes they may force them also to die, right? That is the reason why Supreme Court has brought the concept of living will. Okay, so that is one. Another thing is recently government has brought some guidelines. So how this passive euthanasia has to be administered. So how this has to be implemented. With respect to that, there are some guidelines given. So I told you what is passive and active and legal and illegal. So they have defined what is terminal illness. Terminal illness means any illness which will cause you death, which is beyond your recovery. Okay, so you cannot recover for sure. And doctor, if they certify this will not end, okay, then it will be called as terminal illness and that person is eligible for passive euthanasia. Then withdrawal of life support, that means all the oxygen or ventilator support can be withdrawn in 4 conditions. One is if he is declared brain dead. Most of the times we'll be seeing that also, right? Brain dead. And if they also predict that in future also, because of the treatment and everything also, he may not respond. Okay, if that is also clearly evident, and if the doctor is confirming in future also he will not respond, that can be then. And even the patient and his surrogate, he also has to give that informed consent. Okay, in case if he wants to go for euthanasia or not go for the euthanasia. So that also has to be there. At the same time, there also has to be compliance with the Supreme Court procedure and guidelines. So what Supreme Court said, in that procedure only if you follow, then a life support system can be withdrawn for only active euthanasia patients. Okay, why euthanasia was recognized? Because in the recent times, Supreme Court has broadened the scope of Article 21. Under right to life, it has also included right to die with dignity is also your fundamental right. That means a person doesn't only have right to life, right to die with dignity also, because the person who is in euthanasia or in a condition where he is beyond recovery is suffering. He also have that right to dignified death. That is the reason why it was recognized in India. And here you need to remember Aruna Shahbag case, very important case in 2018. Okay, so she was a nurse in one hospital. She was raped and she went into that brain dead situation. Almost for 20 years or so, she was under treatment only in that hospital, but she was beyond recovery. From 20 years, she has suffered that pain and all. Then finally, that hospital people only, they have asked Supreme Court for mercy killing. That is what we call euthanasia also. And then it was first time recognized by Supreme Court in the year 2018. Right? In that way, we have this euthanasia. Here, what is the main thing you need to understand? Any healthcare decisions, okay? Here, LST means life support treatments. Adult patient, okay? So he has to be in a good health. So when he's deciding whether I have to go for euthanasia and all, he has to be in good health, physical, mental health. Okay. Otherwise, what happens? Mentally ill persons also will be forced to sign any euthanasia related things and all. So it can be withheld and withdrawn, like you can say lawfully or legally, only in certain conditions. We have seen what are the conditions in the earlier slide. And there also will be advanced medical directives also issued. So for specific requirements of euthanasia. Okay. So this will be a main document that will be needed to have euthanasia implemented. So in 2018, it has legalized passive euthanasia, making a person also to have living will. That is when it started. Why? Supreme Court said right to die with dignity is also part of your Article 21. And also living will is nothing but a written document which is given by the person, okay, who is actually facing that issue and who is unable to take their own medical decisions. So before only we are giving this decision, and it is Goa which became the first state to implement this concept of living will based passive euthanasia. Okay, Goa is the first state. The next topic is Global Innovation Index. So index and rankings are very much important in UPSC prelims. Every year one question is coming from ranking and indices. Okay, so Global Innovation Index, innovation means in terms of economy and technology. So based on these criteria, you can see institutions, human capital, infrastructure, so and so. You need not worry about the criteria, but who is releasing and what is the India's rank? That is important for your prelims. So it is WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, which releases this Global Innovation Index. How much is the level of innovation in the country? That is the main thing, right? So here if you see, WIPO is a specialized agency of UN. You have 15 specialized agencies of UN, like WHO, FAO, UN, UNICEF we have, right? Like that we have this organization also. And then, who are all the top performers? You can see here, it is Switzerland, Sweden and USA. 3 countries at least you remember. Then, fastest 10-year climbers. Okay, so if you see India's rank also, it used to be around 81 in 2015. Now it became 40. Okay, that means we have improved at least by half. Okay, in the rankings and all. And India is also one of the top 10 climbers, fast climbers in the Global Innovation Index, along with China and Turkey. Then India's strengths, if you see, India is performing good in ICT, Information Communication Technology, and also in service exports and venture capital. Venture capital means who generally funds the startups. Okay, so if you have remembered Akash Mein Hath Dhura, venture capitalist. Okay, in that movie also it will be shown. Venture capitalist means who will be giving funding in the capital investments for the startups. And in terms of unicorn companies also, India is standing at 8th position. Unicorn means startup companies. Okay, in their establishments, if there is innovation, then only these type of companies will be established, right? India is standing in 8th position. Then what are the steps taken to promote innovation in India? These type of things can be asked in mains. Atal Innovation Mission. Who is implementing this? Anyone in the class? Very good. Niti Aayog is implementing Atal Innovation Mission, and it was asked in UPSC prelims. Direct question. Atal Innovation Mission was implemented by whom? That is the reason when any scheme is there, you need to know which ministry is implementing or agency, what is its main objective, and who are all beneficiaries, if any. Okay. So these are the three things which you need to understand from any government scheme. Then we also have Anusandhan National Research Foundation. This is also to encourage research and innovation, especially in the universities and all the labs. Then Biotechnology Industry Research Association, which we call it as BIRAC. Okay, this is by Department of Biotechnology under Ministry of Science and Technology to increase research and innovation in biotechnology. BIRAC is an institution we have. Then we also have National Research Innovation Fund, NIRF we have. This is also part of National Education Policy 2020. This is very much important because in education, main problem is GDP, and there is also very less enrollment in the secondary and higher secondary education, and there are also very less research related incentives. Okay, that is the main problem. So then what are the challenges that we are facing in innovation? First thing is fragmented innovation ecosystem. So in terms of patents also, we have very less patents getting filed in India compared to China and other countries. Because that innovation, if that is there in the minds also, people are not able to get that innovation out because of lack of proper encouragement from the government and other things. Then skill mismatch is also there. And you know, the persons are getting educated in Indian institutions and they're moving abroad and they're settling there. Brain drain is happening, right? That is also one main problem. Infrastructure bottlenecks. That means we don't have proper infrastructure also, like labs are not there. All the mechanisms, okay, to innovate the things and to bring new ideas, we don't have proper infrastructure. Then limited private sector participation. Okay, so in private we don't have much scope for R&D, and whoever can thrive there or going abroad. That is the main problem. So these are certain initiatives. Then what about WIPO? Just now I told you it is a specialized agency and a self-funding agency of UN. 193 countries, including India, is a member. Then it was formed in the year 1974. It joined UN also at that point of time. Headquarters is in Geneva, Switzerland. Okay, this is important. And what is the way forward? Always we need to increase more funding towards research and development. Okay, there should be more skill development programs in that way. Whatever that boosts innovation, you need to write. Okay, which SDG is related to this? SDG 9. Industry, innovation, and economic growth. Okay, that SDG is close related to this topic. Okay, so you need to remember these. Then next topic from environment, which is very important in upcoming prelims also, is India has signed High Seas Treaty, also called Biodiversity Beyond Natural Jurisdiction. So first thing you need to know, what is a high sea. So see, if this is a coast, right? So from here to 12 nautical miles, we have territorial waters. From again there, 12 nautical miles or from 24 nautical miles from the coast, we have contiguous zone. Okay, so till this region also, the states generally have very good resources. Okay, they can have entire resources used for themselves and all, and no country can enter into this particular region. Okay, full, it will be reserved for these countries. Then exclusive economic zone also, that means 1200, almost from the coast, 200 nautical miles will also be reserved for that particular sovereign state only. That means India can use till 200 nautical miles, what is there in that particular waters, everything can be explored and used by India. Sovereign rights will be there. But beyond 200 nautical miles, that means till there only even Indian Navy also can go, right? Beyond territorial waters or exclusive economic zone, it will come into high seas. High seas means, in science and technology also we discussed, once if you're crossing the geospace, outer space will be common. Same way, high seas also will become common. That means no country can claim rights over that particular resources in the high seas. It will be open for all. Okay, no country will have right in high seas. That is the reason why high seas are also very much important, because most of the biodiversity will be there in the high seas only, and no country actually have the right. That is the reason till now we don't have much focus on high seas also, because every country wants to exploit as much as they can in the exclusive economic zone limit only. So, but now India has signed High Seas Treaty, or also called biodiversity beyond natural jurisdiction. Natural jurisdiction you have till exclusive economic zone. Beyond that, you have significant biodiversity. So the protection of biodiversity is also very much important, right? So when we have very good mineral resources, we have fishing resources there. So to exploit that and to get economical benefit also, we should not disturb any biodiversity there in that particular region. So why it is important? Because 64% of Indian or entire ocean resources are in the high seas only. So it is very much important, and only roughly less than 1% is actually protected. Protected means we are taking some measure at least. So all of them are unprotected. That means it may become a threat in the future also for many communities, because any country like India, which is having almost 7,500 kilometers of coastline, right? So it is also equally subjected to vagaries of climate change. Yes or no? If you are disturbing the oceans or biodiversity, it may again impact India on another way, right? That is the reason why we wanted to sign this treaty. So what is the main thing you need to understand here? It is implemented by whom? This is very much important. It is also called as Global Ocean Treaty also. Okay, Biodiversity Beyond Natural Jurisdiction, or High Seas Treaty, or Global Ocean Treaty, all three are same. Okay, they may confuse with different names. So this is getting implemented in India by Ministry of Earth Sciences, not Ministry of Environment. You may get trapped again. Okay, so it is not Environment, Ministry of Earth Sciences. Then what is the objective? To increase our presence in the high seas strategically. At the same time, we also wanted to comply to SDGs, especially SDG 14, which talks about life below water. Below water. That means marine life also has to be protected. So these are the main things. Then, what is the main thing you need to remember? This was signed as part of UNCLOS or UN clause, United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. That means with respect to sea, and we have a UN law called UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. This is a broader framework under which this treaty was signed. Convention always will be a broader thing, under which we have protocols or treaties which specifically target one particular aspect. Then the main aim of this treaty is sustainable use of biodiversity resources. It can be fishing or it can be mineral resources also. You have to sustainably use it. Then parties cannot claim any right over marine resources that are derived from the high seas. No country can claim whatever you get from the high seas. You cannot claim that it is near India's location or some another country. That is why it belongs to us. So we have to adhere to the common law. Then high seas or global common oceans. Okay, so it doesn't belong to everyone and anyone, and you also have the right of navigation over flight and all other things restricted only. Okay, so there won't be rights. Then this is the third agreement as part of UN clause. First agreement was signed in 94 with respect to mineral exploration. Then we have 95 agreement with respect to fish and its stock conservation and all. In that way, this is going to be the third convention as third agreement as part of UN clause convention. Then coming to the thing you need to understand, it was coming like it was adopted in the year 2023 itself, last year, and it will come into force in case if 60 countries ratify. Signing and ratification both are different, right? Signing is different, ratification is different. Once if they sign, they're saying that we are willing to enter into this particular agreement or treaty, but ratification will be done through passing a domestic law in the particular country's parliament. That means to comply that law, I am making my own national law in the country. For example, you have UN CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. This is UN treaty or convention. To comply this, we have National Biodiversity Act of 2002. That means how you are adhering to that law? By passing your own law, right? That is what ratification means. Every country that signs any international treaty, it has to again ratify, means it has to pass a domestic law to comply the international law, right? So in that way, we have here 60 countries. If they ratify this treaty, that means they have to pass their own domestic laws. And after ratification of 60th country, after 120 days, that means after 4 months, this treaty will come into force. That means 60 countries have to ratify, and after 60th country's ratification, then 120 days after it will come into force. Okay, that is why it is then. Closure means it is open for signature and ratification till 2025 itself. After 2025, there won't be any joining into this agreement. But now, what is the condition I just told you? And what is the status means? Till now, only 8 countries ratified. Understand, I told you the title also, India has signed. India did not ratify. Ratify means it has to bring a law to comply to that. Okay, that is what you need to understand. 100 countries have signed, but only 8 countries have ratified. 60 means 52 more have to ratify. Then, what is UNCLOS? This is a convention with respect to what is the law that you need to follow in the seas. Okay, it was signed in the year 1982 and it came into force in the year 1994. All the time in international relations, especially in environment point of view, the signing of the conventional protocol will be different and coming into force will be different, because signing and ratification, then it has to come into force. That is the reason there will be some gap all the time. And how many countries are part of this? 160 countries. If you see, even in the case of South China Sea dispute also, it is this body who will settle the dispute. Okay, and it said China doesn't have any right in that particular region, Philippines and all. So, but China doesn't agree. Objective is to maintain law and order in world's oceans and seas. And then we also have International Seabed Authority. This is also one authority under UN clause. So, if you wanted to explore anything deep in the ocean, deep ocean bed, mineral resources and all, which are part of high seas, say till exclusive economic zone, you have complete right. But beyond that, if you want, right? In the recent times, if you see, India also have applied for Nikitin Seamount. That is part of Pacific Ocean. Why India is asking for that? Because that is a region where we get polymetallic nodules. Polymetallic nodules means in one rock only we'll get different types of metals and minerals. So, and we know like we are moving towards a cleaner energy source and all. So that means when we wanted to use EVs, batteries and all, we need to have some rare earth metals also, like cobalt, nickel, all this silicon and all, right? That these are present deep in the ocean. That means if this seabed authority gives permission, then only we can mine from the deep sea. This is an authority in the UN clause. So this is also the mechanism you need to understand. And the next topic is overseas citizen of India, right? So this is also in news because there are some rumors that spread on online, and some persons have said like who are already having OCI cards, they have raised some objections that we are losing our card status and all, and later Indian embassies in different countries made it clear that nothing is going to be changed. Okay, so that is the actual context, but you need not remember. What is most important is, in terms of citizenship, we have 3 types of terms which you come across. One is NRIs, okay, non-resident Indians, overseas citizens, and persons of Indian origin, right? In these 3 also, only NRIs are having Indian passport and they are only Indian citizens. Non-resident Indians means who are already Indian citizens but who are not residing in India in any financial year or any 1 year. If they stay less than 182 days in India, less than 182 days, understand, out of 360, half. If they stay less than half in India, then that person is considered to be non-resident Indian. He is having Indian passport only. He'll have all the rights, even voting rights are also there, right? But whereas overseas citizen or persons of Indian origin will not be Indian citizens, okay? We are having some special type of attachment with these, because persons of Indian origin are those persons who are foreign citizens but who have some origin in India. For example, if any person, 2 Indian citizens are there, let us consider, and 2 Indian citizens got settled in USA and they have a child there, right? Then that child will become PIO, person of Indian origin, because their parent and grandparents belong to India and they have citizenship. But that citizen who was actually born in USA, she'll have the passport of USA, right? She'll not become the Indian citizen. That is what we call it as person of Indian origin. But what is overseas citizen of India? Overseas citizen of India means they are also foreign nationals but who are capable of getting Indian citizenship. That means on 26th January 1950, when our constitution came into force, they all having that capability of getting Indian citizenship, or at that point of time, they were part of British India, but later, you know, at that point of time, British have taken some Indian citizens to abroad and settled them as indentured laborers in tea plantations and all. They might have settled there, but they have already hold Indian passport at least once in their lifetime, right? But now they were not actually part of Indian citizenship. Okay, in that way, these are overseas citizen of India. So PIOs generally will not have Indian citizenship; they are foreign nationals only. But OCS, once at least in their lifetime of having Indian citizenship, but later on because of their things, they got settled in various countries. And then if that country is not allowing dual citizenship, they need to remove Indian citizenship and they have to take the citizenship like India also, right? That is how they are overseas citizen of India. But here, what is the benefit they have? They have lifetime visa. That means anytime they visit India, they can have only one visa. Every time they need not, again, you can say renew the visa and all. So the process will not be there. And once if they come to India also, they need not go to the local police station, they need not register. That beyond a certain limit if they stay also, they need not inform the local police station. And they can also have same treatment like NRIs. They can also see when you visit any historical monument or anywhere, you will see like Indian citizens will have to pay this price and foreign nationals this price. The difference will be there, right? When you visit Charminar also, there will be these prices different. Overseas citizen will be having same fares like Indian citizens, okay? So they can also do the same type of activities, but there are certain restrictions also. They cannot vote like NRIs. They cannot contest for public posts like President of India, Parliament. They cannot become part of administration. These restrictions are also there, and they cannot acquire property also in India. They cannot acquire property also in India because, you know, once if they come, we only don't have property to redistribute among ourselves, right? That is the reason. So we have certain rights and privileges given to them, and we also have certain limitations imposed on them, right? That is what the concept of overseas citizen of India. But you need to understand, I just told you, overseas or foreign nationals, and they need to have either in this category. So one is they have to be eligible for citizenship, okay? They may not actually have, but they should have the condition of having citizenship on 26 January 1950. Then they are citizens of India, and after 26 January 1950, their territories may become part of India. For example, you know, Goa was not part of main India in 1947. It became part of India in 1961. Portuguese control, right? So 1961 only, Goa was made part of India. That means even Goan citizens who are not part of Indian citizenship at that point of time, if later Goa, when it got merged or acquired by India, can also become overseas citizen, okay? Then any minor children of that particular citizen also may become overseas citizen in future. After getting majority, if they apply, they can get that citizenship, okay? That is what you need to know. And NRI and PIOs I told you, right? So they should also have at least Indian passport, and NRIs are mainly, you need to remember, less than 182 days in a year, they have to stay in India, okay? I mean, if they stay less than 182 days, and another condition is also there, in 4 years, at least if less than 1 year you can consider, 365 days means, if they stay in India, out of 3 years outside and 1 year inside India, then also they'll be treated as NRIs. Then, how this concept came into picture means, in the year 2000, there is a constitution, there is a committee constituted under LM Singhvi. If you have read polity in LM Singhvi, in which particular topic will be coming across? PRAs, Panchayat Raj institutions, okay? LM Singhvi committee also recommends the constitutional recognition for PRAs, okay? So 3-tier structure and all. So what happens is, this 1955 Citizenship Act, okay, because you know, original constitution only talks about 5 to 11 articles of Indian constitution. It said in future who have to become citizen or how to acquire citizenship, everything will be dealt by Indian Parliament. So Indian Parliament will bring a law. That is what constitution has said, right? So constitution, as it said, Parliament has to make a law. It was passed in 1955 to say what are the methods of acquiring citizenship. What are the methods of acquiring citizenship? Simply remember, grant 5 ways of acquiring Indian citizenship: birth, registration, acquisition, naturalization, descent. Okay, so these are the 5 ways of acquiring citizenship in India. By birth, you can be citizens. Registration means by registering. For example, that is a case of Sonia Gandhi. if you are getting married to an Indian national and if you're residing for 7 years, and then you can apply for registration to get Indian citizenship. Acquisition means Goa acquired by India, they also get citizenship of India. Naturalization, the case of Mother Teresa. Okay, so naturalization means any citizen has to naturalize. That means they have to live for 14 years in India and they also have to know at least one language of 8th schedule. Okay, they should have good behavior and everything. Then only they'll get naturalized citizen. And you know, in India, a president can be a citizen by birth or by naturalization also. And recently, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, that was also through naturalization. But that 14-year tenure or the period was reduced to 5 years only. That is the main thing you need to remember. And by descent means blood relation. Okay. So, for example, if the parents are Indian citizens and if the child is born in some another country, right, then she has to abandon that citizenship and she has to take Indian citizenship by descent. Okay. These are the 5 ways. And it was given by Citizenship Amendment Act of 1955. Later, they have said they have to make some amendments to this act, allowing dual citizenship of persons of Indian origin. Because India doesn't allow dual citizenship. But other countries will allow dual citizenship, right? That is the reason at that point of time, we allowed dual citizenship for 16 countries, excluding Pakistan and Bangladesh. Because, you know, Pakistan and Bangladesh are not good to India. Then, in 2005, 16 countries scope was expanded and we have extended to all countries except Bangladesh and Pakistan. Then, in 2015, this concept of PIO and OCI got clubbed. Now there is no PIO. PIO and OCI clubbed into one category, right? That is how it is operating now. So rights and privileges I told you. Multiple entry, lifetime visa. They need not actually report to the police station, local police for any duration, and they have also rights like NRIs only, but they cannot acquire any agriculture or plantation properties in India. And then these are the limitations. They cannot vote or cannot hold any constitutional post and not eligible for employment in the government positions. So these are the things which you need to know. Then in the recent times, overseas citizenship is also getting cancelled by Indian government. Why? Because in case if they register by fraud or any false means, or if there is any illegal communication with the enemy during the wartime by overseas citizen, or if they disobey the Indian constitution, or any person who is having OCI, if they were sentenced 2 or more years, okay, after getting overseas citizenship in any country, then also, and if it is against India's sovereignty, unity and everything, then also they can terminate overseas citizenship. These are the things. Then